Okay, feel free to continue introducing yourself in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and get started as it is 11 o'clock. So again, welcome to Parkside Chats. This Parkside Chat is on immigration stories told from Angel Island State Park. So excited for this one. And so we will have a Q&A, section. So in the meantime, please feel free to use the Q&A button to submit your questions, and we will be monitoring that. And as you can see on here, we have a photo to show you how to use that. So this is our agenda. We'll start out with a brief welcome, a little bit about Parkside Chats. Then we'll introduce our guest speaker for today. And then we'll go into the Q&A with your questions that you have submitted. And then we will do closing marks. I do want to give a heads up that we will do our best to get through as many questions as we can, but we want to make sure that we end right at 12 p.m. to give you your time back. So again, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. I am your host today, Shakayla Leonard. I am the Member Stewardship Manager, and I've been with the foundation for almost 9 years, coming up in July. It's been an amazing journey, and essentially my role here is to manage membership operations and stewardship. So you see my name a lot, especially when it comes to events such as this one. Now, a little bit about California State Parks Foundation. California State Parks Foundation has been protecting parks for nearly 60 years. We were founded in 1969 as an independent nonprofit dedicated to the entire state park system. We are funded exclusively by membership and philanthropic gifts, not tax dollars. We have served as a steadfast voice for parks for nearly 6 decades, navigating disasters, budget cries, and political headwinds while raising hundreds of millions of dollars to keep the park safe, accessible, and resilient. Now, we are collaborating today with Angel Island State Park. So, just a little bit about our connection with Angel Island State Park. We have volunteer days there for wildfire resilience work and invasive species removal. We recently hosted our Earth Day there, and we do grant funding as well that has supported restoration projects and expanded park access over the years. So that is a little bit about our connection with Angel Island and why it's important today that we highlight them. So about Parkside Chats, if you haven't been to our previous ones, this is a new virtual event series that we started in 2025. And the goal of this event series is to bring together park lovers, experts, and community voices. It offers insights on conservation, history, climate resilience, and park access. It's a way to stay connected to California's parks from wherever you are. We have two main formats, which is webinar style or virtual tour, such as this one today. This will be our first virtual tour, which is very exciting. And our most recent Parkside Chats were honoring Indigenous heritage in California state parks, 2025 monarch butterflies population count, and on the front lines of climate resilience in the California desert state parks. If you were not able to tune into any of those, we do have all of those recordings uploaded on our YouTube channel, and you can also access through our blogs on the website. Now, without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest speaker, Cynthia Pugh, who is the lead state park interpreter at Angel Island. She will be the one who will be giving us a virtual tour of Angel Island and discussing all the beautiful history and stories. So I will hand it over to Cynthia.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my voice is coming through. I'll wait a bit until my video is coming through. All right. So Welcome everyone to Angel Island State Park. My name is Cynthia, and as Shakayla mentioned, I work here on the island. And I'm seeing where so many people are coming from in the chat. I did see a Cynthia from San Jose fly by. I'm also a Cynthia from San Jose, so that was very exciting to see. And throughout today, I'm mainly going to be showing you a very important historic building here on the island. But before I really dive into the program, would love to know a little bit more about what kind of I'm imagining we're fans of state parks here. And so in the Q&A feature that they were pointing out earlier, if people could drop in just what is your favorite state park that you've been to and why it's your favorite? So if we could get a few of those in, would love to see your answers, and then I'll go ahead and share why I love Angel Island here. Right. And then once a few of those answers start coming through, if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe like three of those answers on what are favorite state parks and why. And then I'll go ahead and continue on.
Yes, so we have Torrey Pines, Beach and Hike is the reason why. Half Moon Bay State Beach. We have Mount Diablo, since it's close by and lots of nice trails. I agree with all those choices.
All right, awesome. So definitely seeing a lot of a love for the natural history here at state parks. And so what I'm going to highlight here at Angel Island State Park is maybe an aspect of state parks that we're not too familiar with, which is the human history that we highlight here. And the main history that I'm going to focus on here is immigration history in the early 1900s. But immigration is a international story, right? Inherently, it's part of the world. And then so before I dive into that history, I should show you where is Angel Island, just in case you have no idea where we are in the world. And so I'm going to pull up a map right now, a world map. And we are in California, being a California state park. And the reason why I like this world map is because you can see Asia over here. And a lot of our immigration history is connected to Asia. And in a moment, I'll explain why. And so we'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit. You're going to start to see California, and you're also going to see China. The largest group of individuals that came through Angel Island specifically were from China. And again, I'll explain in a little bit on why exactly that was the case. But continuing to zoom in, Angel Island is very close to San Francisco. And so we are actually the biggest natural island in the San Francisco Bay. But a lot of people don't notice us because we're so big, we kind of look like a peninsula from the distance. But that red dot is exactly where I am. So zooming in a little bit more, you're going to start to see some things you might recognize. Very close to us, you're going to see the Golden Gate Bridge right there. And very close by as well, you're going to see our more famous island cousin, Alcatraz, over there. And let me see. And zooming in a little bit more, that red dot is exactly where I am right now. This building is the Detention Barracks Museum, where in the early 1900s, it was the largest immigration station on the West Coast, and there were 300,000 immigrants that were processed through here. I'm actually right on this porch right here, talking with you all right now. But something that I want to know is this station on Angel Island was open from 1910 to 1940. It was only open for about 30 years. And so what I do want to acknowledge is that the first people that were here on the island were here thousands of years ago. They're the Coast Miwok people. Some of them came to the island on tule boats, hunted and fished and brought food back for their families. Some of them also lived here. But because of Spaniard colonization, they're no longer around on the island, but their descendants are still very much around today, thriving in their communities. But as I mentioned, the focus of today is going to be on immigration. And so I really want to show you the inside of that historic building that I showed you a picture of. So let's head in. Again, this is the detention barracks, where from 1910 to 1940, there would have been immigrants who were held in this room, waiting to see whether or not they were going to be allowed to enter the United States. And this building, being historic, is original. So the walls that you see here, the poles, even the floor, all of that is original and historic. And looking at this building, let me just set up my tripod here. Flip the camera back to me. There you go. Looking at this building, right, this place I mentioned was opened in 1910, but immigration has been happening to America for a long time, right? So what was the motivation for it specifically being open in 1910? Well, for that, we need to go back in time a little bit. And I like to go back to the year 1849. And now, especially for the Californians in the chat, we might know why 1849 is a special year for this state. And it is because it is when gold was discovered in California, right? Eureka, our state motto. What I have here is a picture of the first piece of gold that was ever discovered. And because of this gold, people from all over the world want to get some of this gold. And this motivated the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And this railroad project was massive, first of its kind. And you can see just how big it was compared to the people next to it. And a project of this size, especially at that time, required a lot of people to work on it. And these railroad companies at the time realized, hey, immigrants are willing to work for less money than Americans. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to pass laws that say that we're allowed to pay immigrants less than white laborers. And also, you know what? We're not going to give them food either. We're going to give food to our white American laborers, but everyone else, they can fend for themselves. They'll find their own foods. And so in this pursuit of finding cheaper labor, there is a big push to find immigrant laborers to come work on the railroad. One of the countries that these railroad companies particularly sought for was China, because China had a lot of skilled laborers who knew how to do this work already, but also China was facing a lot of push factors. There's various civil wars, as well as economic difficulties and flooding happening. And so with all of these factors, there's a big pull of Chinese immigrants to work on the railroads. And here I have some pictures of Chinese railroad workers that came through. But something happened in this period of Chinese immigration. The gold started to run out, and it became harder and harder for people to find jobs. And if you think to yourself, different moments throughout world history, when a country is experiencing economic difficulties, the pattern that happens is people will find a group of people to blame. It's this group of people, it's their reason why we can't find jobs here. And it happened to be that with this pull of Chinese immigration, the blame was put on the Chinese immigrants. And so there was a large wave of anti-Chinese racism. Chinese people were chased out of Chinatowns. Chinatowns were even sometimes burned down. There were sundown laws put into place that stated if you are Black or if you are Chinese, you're not allowed to leave your homes after dark. And in this rise and rise of anti-Chinese racism, the first law that ever significantly prevented immigration purely on the basis of race was passed. And that was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And what this law said was, hey, if you're a Chinese immigrant and you're not wealthy, you don't got a lot of money, and you don't have a job that we want, you're not a doctor, you're not a professor, you're not a diplomat, or if you don't have any family here, you're not allowed to enter this country. And so, what did enforcing that law take? It took asking the immigrants a lot of questions, it took checking their paperwork, and that process took time. And so, they needed a place to hold and detain the immigrants while this process was happening. And this building right here on Angel Island was built for the purpose of enforcing that Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And now I would love to show more of the building for you for the rest of the remainder of this program. But before I do, I know I've been talking a lot. So if there are any questions before we get to our kind of official Q&A at the end, would love to maybe grab, let's say 3 questions, Shakayla, and then if any have come up, and then I can go ahead and continue.
Sure, give me 1 second. Okay, so one question we have was Wong Kim Park 1895 Supreme Court citizenship ruling held at Angel Island?
It was not held at Angel Island. The closest connection I know that Wong Kim Ark has here is that his sons were detained here. And so even after kind of like the ruling all took place, his sons did end up being detained in this building. But that's the closest connection that we have to Wong Kim Ark's kind of a moment in history.
Thank you. Another question is, what is the status of the mooring boys at Angel Island? Sorry.
Can you repeat that one more time?
What is the status of the mooring boys at Angel Island?
Oh, the Maureen like
Mooring, like,
buoys?
yes, sorry, buoys.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so this is probably outside of the immigration site. If you are a frequenter of Angel Island, you may have heard that some of our boat slips are down. And the most recent update that I've been given is we're going to get those boat slips up and going. I believe the construction is going to be starting in 2027. That's the most recent update I have.
Great, thank you. And the last question we have, is there a best time of year to visit Angel Island?
Ooh, that's a great question. Is there a best time of year? I would say so summer is when we have a lot of public visitation. And obviously like the winter gets a little bit dicey with the winds and very occasionally the ferries are canceled because the weather is so bad. I would say aiming for a fall weekend is what I personally think is the best because then you avoid the school groups, but you also avoid the public crowds. And so that's what I would suggest for visiting. Yeah.
And to add to that, can you also talk a little bit about the accessibility options? So, like physical walking accessibility, like if you need to use a walker on the island.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so all of the sites at Angel Island are designated accessible, but the hike is not necessarily so. So people can do the hike, but it's not technically within ADA standards. And so there's a paved road that hits most of our sites, but there are some hills involved along the way. And so what I would recommend is if we're trying to avoid that hike, going to our partner, Angel Island Company, who runs shuttles. The shuttles are based off of what the visitation is looking like. And then so hitting those moments when visitation is a little bit higher, that's when they're going to be running their shuttles. And then so aiming for those shuttles, they're going to get you to where you need. And at the immigration site specifically, all of the buildings are accessible. So to avoid the stairs, we've got ramps to both of our museums and we've got elevators in both of the museums as well.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was very helpful.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the questions. And so shifting back to the history that we have here about the immigration history. So the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 is passed. The station is built in response in 1910. And so looking at this space where immigrants would have been held, non-Chinese immigrants would have been held here for an average of 2 to 3 days. Chinese immigrants would have been held here for an average of 2 to 3 weeks. But those weeks could stretch to a month, could stretch to a few months, a year. And the longest detention that we have on record is of a 16-year-old boy. His name is Kong Kwan, and he was held here for 25 months. And so looking at this room that I'm in, what did people do while they were here? There weren't many places to go. One of the things that they did was they carved into the walls. And because this building is original, we can see the carvings that they left behind. There's a few different languages here, some that you may or may not recognize, but one that I really like, especially since we're based in California, is one right here. It says Viva Mexico, or Long Live Mexico. And so we know that was left behind by Mexican immigrant who would have been detained here about 100 years ago. And these carvings, when the officials found them, they were considered graffiti. And so the officials tried to cover them up. They would fill the words in with wood putty and they would paint it over. And there's actually 7 layers of paint on the wall, just from the officials trying to cover up all the writing that the immigrants kept leaving behind. Now, there is one set of carvings inside this entire building that was never filled in with wood putty. And so I want to show you what that carving looks like now. We're going to have to move through a few rooms to see it. And in the couple of rooms between us, Wi-Fi might get a little bit shaky, might get a little bit blurry, but once I get to that room, we'll click right back. There we go. This is the only set of carvings inside the entire building that was never filled in with wood putty. And you can see, compared to those really faint carvings I showed you before, that Viva Mexico, that was really faint because the putty was still in there. This is what those carvings would have originally looked like before the officials got their hands on it. And we as museum staff, we didn't do anything to restore or make this carving look better. This is exactly what it looked like when we found it inside the building. And you can just see how much craftsmanship was put into these characters. This set of carving in particular is a Chinese poem. And as beautiful as this particular one is, the translation is a little bit difficult to explain. There's some references to Chinese history, Chinese culture, which requires just a little bit further of an explanation. And so with the limited time I have with you all, I'm going to move into another room and share with you another Chinese poem that I really like, where the English translation is a little bit more intuitive. So let's continue on through. And we are open to the public today, so if you ever want to visit like these folks, you could totally come by. But this room, much like the very first one that I was in, would have been a room where the immigrants were held. But where you see these 6 beds right here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want you to imagine the 6 beds between every set of poles inside this room. This room at maximum capacity would have held about 200 people. And to give you an idea of how much room the immigrants had around the beds that are no longer here, if you actually look at the floors, you can see where the color has changed literally from the hundreds of thousands of footsteps that wore into the floors between the beds. And moving on to the poems, I'm actually going to share the poem that this visitor is looking at right now. But before we get there, I want to show you a cool bit on the wall, which shows you the steps of the poetry in the building. How did they carve that so beautifully? Well, the first step, someone with some skill in calligraphy would have written with ink onto the walls. And then using that as a template, someone with some kind of carving skill would have carved on top of it into the wood. And you can see maybe over here, once maybe they got spooked by a guard and had to pause in writing their poem here. But the poem that I want to share is right here. And so Chinese is traditionally read up and down, right to left. And so it's going to be this block of characters right here. But instead of pointing the camera at me, I'm actually going to point the camera outside because I want you all to imagine what this immigrant may have been looking at while they were carving this into the walls. They would have seen the hospital across the way. They would have seen these trees, many of these which are historic and also original from this time period, and just a sliver of the water separating them from the mainland over there. Random thoughts deep at night. In the quiet of night, I heard faintly the whistling of wind. The forms and shadows saddened me. Upon seeing the landscape, I composed a poem. The floating clouds, the fog darken the sky. The moon shines faintly as the insects chirp. Grief and bitterness entwined are heaven sent. The sad person sits alone, leaning by a window. And that particular poem is really special because it was actually signed. So we know it was written by a man named Yi from a place called Taishan in China. And the reason why that's so special is remember, these engravings were considered graffiti. And that meant that if an immigrant was caught carving into the walls, their entry into the United States could be denied. And so it was a big risk that they were taking to carve on the walls in the first place. But it would have been an even bigger risk to leave their names behind, right? To risk putting a label on what was considered not allowed. But these poems actually ended up saving this building. You're going to see throughout this building, you're going to see several engravings. You're going to see engravings in English, Urdu, Gurmukhi. There's one in French, there's German, Russian, Japanese, Korean, and a few others I'm sure I'm forgetting right now. But there are over 200 in Chinese. And one reason why is because poetry, traditionally in China, was a form of protest. And so this was a way for the Chinese immigrants here to resist the circumstances that they were being held in and to express their feelings and express what it was like being held in a space like this, being targeted only because of their race. And now I've kind of covered two acts so far. The first act was what led to this building being built, right? The gold rush era, the transcontinental railroad. Now, the second act that I've covered is the station being opened. What was it like for people to be held here? How long were they held here? What was in reaction to that detention? It was the poetry. And now I'm going to move on to a third act, which is 1910 to 1940, the station was opened. Station closes in 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act is repealed. What happened after the military handed the island over to California State Parks? That's a final thing that I want to touch upon. But before I get to that, I actually have a question for you all, which is, The island has changed, right, throughout all these years. But I want you to think of the place you're living in, your neighborhood, your community. What are some changes that you've seen while you've been there in the past few years? Has something new been added? Has something been removed? Have you seen the people change? Have you seen the buildings change? Have you seen the nature change? So in your communities, your neighborhoods, what have you seen change in the last few years? And again, Shaquille, if maybe we could get 3 answers, and then I'll go ahead and continue to the third last act of the program.
Yes, I will go ahead and as soon as they are coming through, I'll give you three.
Little time behind the
Yes,
keyboard. Yeah.
yeah, no problem. I see more houses built into the hillside. PG&E just cut down 4 redwoods on my street in Sacramento. Let's see. Commercial and residential building replacing farmland. And I'll give you one last one, removal of natural habitat and addition of buildings.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, a lot of seeing the landscaping change, seeing things built where they weren't before. And so now I want to share kind of after the immigration station history happened, 1910 to 1940. After the station closed for immigration, it was actually used also for World War II. So prisoners of war were held here, as well as Japanese men from Hawaii who were being processed for internment. This place would have also been a processing facility for that. And we can also see where the carvings from the immigrants are underneath the paint. On top of the paint, we can see the pencil writings from the prisoners of war who are here, their names, their dates, some feelings of anger as well on top of the paint. Next step of change, the station closes. Military leaves the island and puts it up for bid. California State Parks wins the bids. And so California State Parks, they're looking at Angel Island and they're thinking, how can we get people to visit this island? And they look around at the immigration site here and they look at what I was just showing you, the view of the water, the big hospital building, the trees over here. And they think, hey, what is the point of California State Parks? It's for recreation. And so you know what's going to get people to come here? It's picnic tables and campgrounds. And so if you actually look at the original plans for Angel Island State Park, this building was going to be demolished. They were going to demolish all the buildings here at the immigration site to make way for these campgrounds and these picnic tables. But before they could do that, a new ranger is hired on. His name is Alexander Weiss. And Alexander Weiss had the unique trait at the time of being the first ranger ever hired to California State Parks that had spent time in county jail. And that's because of the work that he did with the Freedom Riders protesting segregation on buses. And so Alexander Weiss is hired on. And Alexander Weiss also, his family history maybe comes into play here, where his family immigrated to the United States to flee Nazi occupation in Europe. And so Alexander Weiss, he goes through life. He ends up at Angel Island State Park. And as a ranger here, he decides to get familiar with the island. And so he sees this big abandoned building and he goes through with a flashlight and notices all of the poems on the wall. Those poems that the immigrants knew that they were not supposed to do. And he stops and says, wait, this place might be important to some people. And so Alexander Weiss goes to his leads and says, wait, I don't think this place should be burned down. But I want you all to think of the first job that you ever got. Imagine if you were to go up to your boss at the time and try to tell them not to do something that they were planning on doing. They ignored him. But Alexander Weiss pushes on. He goes to his professor in San Francisco State at the time. And his professor happens to have happens to be a descendant of a Japanese immigrant who passed through the station. And together they spread the word and they engaged the local Asian American community, letting them know that this building is here. And those activists, they first come into the building to take photos of those poems I showed you, to preserve them. But as they're taking the photos, they think to themselves, this isn't enough. We need to save this building. And so, much like the immigrants here who protested by carving into the walls, those activists protest as well. They protest and petition, and they demand California state parks. You cannot burn this building down. And in fact, it's not even enough to keep it around. You need to preserve it as a museum so more people know about the stories here. And because I'm standing here, you do know that they were successful. And the people involved in these protests, many of them were students. Many of them were teachers. For college, I went to UC Davis, and I actually had the pleasure of meeting a visitor who was also going to UC Davis at the time. And she drove down to help support these protests here. And so Angel Island is a product of activism and protest that's been handed down like a relay race, right? From the immigrants who carved into the walls, even when they knew that their entry into America could be denied because of that. They said, I need to tell my stories and I need to resist and protest. Handing that relay baton to Alexander Weiss, who, was familiar with what we sometimes call good trouble. And he hands that baton to the Asian American community who rallies and protests and petitions for this history to stay around. And now, where is that baton going to? Well, I like to think that it's gone to me to help highlight the stories here. And I also want to hand this baton to you. I want you to think about those state parks that you really love. I want you to think about what's been happening in your communities. And maybe you've been happy with some of the changes that you've been seeing. Maybe you haven't been happy with some of these changes that you've been seeing. The people who helped save the site here at Angel Island State Park, they were ordinary people. They were teachers and they were students. They were not politicians and people of power. And so California State Parks, it truly does belong to you all. And so the changes that you want to see in the park system, the spaces that you want to see preserved, I hope Angel Island can be a beacon and example that state parks has always belonged to the people here. And you have the voice in deciding what is preserved and what is saved here in the parks. And so I want to thank you all so much for joining my program. And we can go ahead and move on to the official Q&A session now, or if you have any questions for me, if you have any questions for the foundation, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It was amazing. I do want to tell you that I also went to UC Davis, so go Ags. I saw some other Ags in the chat.
Woohoo!
And I have a couple questions of my own that I would like to ask before I hand it over to the audience. So this will also give the audience some more time to submit any questions if they have not. So the first thing I want to ask you is you mentioned the baton being passed to you.
Yeah.
I'm curious on why you accepted that baton or what drew you to become a state park interpreter for Angel Island State Park specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was my personal story? How did I end up here at Angel Island State Park? Well, you may have heard the age-old story of I went to UC Davis. I was studying wildlife fishing conservation biology because I wanted to become a field researcher. And then I left not wanting to do field research anymore. I had seen my colleagues that were in the field that had lost their jobs because of federal grants being removed from the work that they were doing. And I thought, hey, I don't know if I want to be in a job that's up to the whim of whoever's in office at that time. And then so I left college not really knowing what to do, but I knew that I wanted to be involved in wildlife and the outdoors. And so I hopped around in different positions until I ended up in a position where I was about to lose my health insurance. And a friend was like, hey, California State Parks might be a good fit for you. And so I went to Cal Careers. That's the bulletin board where you can find all California state jobs, by the way, if you're searching. And I applied to every single California State Parks job that was on there. And one of the few that I heard back from was Angel Island. And I didn't know actually anything about the history here. The history that I've told you about, the Chinese Exclusion Act, Angel Island, the detention center here. I didn't know any of that until maybe 11 p.m. the night before my interview when I was researching about it to try to impress the interview board. But then I learned about the history that happened here. I learned about what had happened to basically my community, right? My people who are the Asian American community who's based here in California. And it was a really sobering moment as I learned this history because I was thinking, like, hey, how did I not learn about this growing up? I've been in California my entire life. And I also thought about to this moment. I thought back to 2020 when the pandemic was happening and violence against Asian elders were on the rise. And in that moment, this was before I was applying at Angel Island. This was a few years back. I remember my parents, they were out and about. They were playing this mobile game that required you to drive around, but they were going after dark to play this mobile game. And then so I was telling my parents, hey, do you think you could like stop going out after dark to play this game? Because I'm just worried something might happen to you guys. And I'll never forget what my dad told me in response, which he said, well, it's always been like this. He wasn't fazed at all by what was happening to the news, right? It like when he told me, it was very blasé what his reply was. And I didn't think about it much. I just thought it was my dad brushing off something happening in the news again. That's just kind of his personality. But then skip forward to a few years where I was learning about the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? I was learning about these discriminatory practices that were happening towards the Chinese and Asian American community. And I had this moment of guilt, to put it to the least, of how did I not know that this was the racism that my parents were enduring and the racism that my community and people before me have been enduring. And then so ending up at Angel Island really felt fortuitous because it was a moment for me to give back. I didn't learn this as a student. I didn't learn this until I was 20 something. This is my moment so that other people, if they've never heard about the history here, I can give back and I can be a voice for the stories of the people who are held here.
Wow, thank you for that. It's very touching, and I've been in person, and you've guided one of the tours I've been on, and it's just always beautiful the way you tell the stories and you share the island. It you can definitely see the connection there, and so it's always a joy when you are leading these type of
Oh,
talks or the tours. So thank you so much. And the last question I want to ask you before I hand it over to the audience is. Uh, the poems is always one of my favorite parts of the tours. I'm curious, do you have a favorite poem or a couple of poems that you
ooh,
connect with?
a favorite poem inside the building. Let me see. I think I might have it saved in a screenshot, but let me see if I can look for it. Um, if I have it here. Let me see. Okay. All right, so I can't find my favorite poem here. I did save it on the iPad here. But there is this line that I believe is the last line of the poem that says, "My bridge across the sky was broken." And that's a line that I always think about because it's actually one of the poems that we can no longer find in the building. Because even though the poems have started to emerge after the putty has been fading, it's been drying out, there's some poems that that putty has stayed firm or parts of the building have deteriorated, right? And we've lost these poems. And that is one of those poems that we've lost. And just thinking of the idea of the my bridge across the sky has been broken, right? Of like what was happening to the immigrant at the time. Like I can only guess that maybe their entry ended up being denied, and that was something that they left behind right before, they were put back on a boat that was heading back to China. But another poem that I can share, which I still really like, and one that I know how to actually read in Chinese, is on the second floor here. So I'll go ahead and head up to that poem right now and share that one with you all. So in terms of fluencies that I can speak, the Chinese dialect that I'm familiar with is Mandarin. But my Mandarin is just okay. And so I, I have to study these poems to be the which is why I can't read them right here. And the reason why you're seeing so many colors is because this shows the layers of paint that I mentioned were used to cover up the poems. And so this is actually revealed in chronological order. First, the building was open. There was no paint. It was just wood. Eventually, these shades of jade green were added, these shades of brown, and finally this gray and yellow for World War II. And the poem that I'm going to read, let me just flip the camera around over here. Let's see. Oh, my hat is big. Okay. Is going to be right over here. But something that I want to note is even though the Chinese dialect that I speak is Mandarin, most of the Chinese immigrants that passed through here actually spoke a dialect called Toisanese. Toisanese is going to be a little bit more similar to Cantonese, but Toisanese, I just want to highlight, is considered to be a dying language. And so there are fewer and fewer people around today who are actually able to speak this dialect, the dialect that this poem would have likely been read in. And so just want to give a note that what I'm about to read will sound a little bit different than what this poet would have intended. But first I'll read it in Mandarin, and then I'll read it in English. 千愁万恨咱美珍，望东美洲难上难。发奴把我愁困死，烈士英雄一丝言。A thousand sorrows and a hatred 10,000-fold burns between my brows. Hoping to step ashore, the America is the most difficult of difficulties. The barbarians imprisoned me in this place. Oh, and actually, the last line is escaping me, but that's going to be the first three lines that you see in this poem over here. I'm going to move myself to get out of the doorway of our visitors who might be here.
Thank you again. That was, yeah, amazing, Cynthia. You just always, it's just amazing. And being able to see you read that in a different language outside of English, it just brings it all full circle. And so it's making me want to go again to Angel Island. I just love being in Angel Island. So thank you again. And now I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions. So we have already pulled some of the questions. So the first question is, a family member was processed at Angel Island. Is there a way to research his time there? And this is also a two-part. The second part is, are there public records of those who came through Angel Island?
Yeah, so there's absolutely ways to research and find that. I'm so glad that you're interested in learning more about your family history. It's something that I encourage for everyone who comes to Angel Island. And so there are kind of two main avenues that you can navigate that. Angel Island State Park is not going to be where you go. We are a state park. We are meant for recreation. We don't really have facilities that are secure enough for those kinds of records. And so the two places that you can go to are the San Bruno National Archives. And so they're going to have the most comprehensive records. If you give them a call, if you email them and set up an appointment, some points of information that will help them find which records to pull is if you have a name, a paper name, a ship name, a date, anything like that is going to help them find the records that you're looking for. The second source of information, which is not as comprehensive, but is much easier to access, is Ancestry.com. They released a portion of the records from the Chinese Exclusion era that are associated with Angel Island. And so Ancestry.com might be a good first place to do a little bit of just community research and science, seeing what you can find. And then the San Bruno National Archives would be the much more comprehensive resource. And the San Bruno National Archives might not have the specific records, but they can definitely point you where to go, even if they don't have it.
Thank you. Those are great resources. The next question is, are there Chinese language tours in Mandarin or Cantonese at Angel Island?
Yeah, so we've been really fortunate recently that we've gotten in touch with a couple of volunteers who are able to interpret the tour. And then so it would be like I would lead the tour, and then if one of those two volunteers are available, they'll help translate throughout the tour. But it is a constantly evolving resource because we don't have basically like a language contractor constantly available. And then so it's always whoever's working the staff, right? If they can speak the language, we get a lot of requests for Spanish-led tours, for example. But it's truly whoever's in the staff and whoever is volunteering. And so this is an answer that is accurate right now. But as the years go on, as the staff changes, as the volunteers change, that answer will change.
So is it recommended to probably reach out first and see if there will be a volunteer on site who can give the tours in a certain language before
Yeah,
visiting? Okay.
absolutely. And actually, I'll pull up kind of the email to reach out to right now. If you have any questions about booking a tour or visit on Angel Island, this is going to be the email to reach out to. And so basically, if you just reach out to us and like, hey, I'm interested in this date and these few dates, then we'll basically take your request, go to the volunteer and be like, hey, are you available on these dates? And we'll get back to you with a yes or a no.
Great, thank you. So another question was, do you have translation of the writings carved?
Yeah, and so we do have those translations, and it's actually a really interesting history behind that because the effort with translating and preserving these poems starts with two immigrants who are actually detained here, Yi and Smiley Jan. They actually recorded together about 100 of the poems that were here, and that's why we have access to some of these poems that are no longer here. And just in the last year, actually, we're finally able to continue those efforts of Yi and Smiley Jan to volunteers, to our nonprofit partners. And they recently released what we call the Poetry Finder. And so if you Google Angel Island Poetry Finder, you're going to find translations, transcriptions, and audio transcriptions matching the dialect of the poem uploaded online. It's a completely free resource. You could Google it and find it right now. The next step that we're going to right now is all of the non-Chinese inscriptions inside the building. And so that effort has started. We've found the people, we have the translations, but just in terms of getting it on a platform where people can access, that's kind of what's taking the bulk of the time right now.
Oh, cool. I'm definitely going to be doing the deep dive
Ooh,
after this.
yes, please do.
So, another question was, how do visitors get to the island?
Ooh, how do visitors get to the island? That is a great question. So I have a couple of pictures here that let me see will help support this. So da, 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 let me go. There it is. Okay. And so this is what the island is looking right now. And if you look at the island, you will notice we are a true island. Sometimes we get calls from the public of, hey, can I drive my car over? Can I park my RV there? There's no bridge or road connecting us to the mainland. And your ferry that you could come over might look a little something like this. This is a ferry that departs from Tiburon. And there's also a ferry that departs from San Francisco. And so if you go to the ferry building, that's where it departs from. And again, there's one from Tiburon. And these schedules do change throughout the year. They sometimes switch depending on the day of the week as well. And then so doing advanced research on what those ferry schedules are, because I would say the most common reason that people can't make their trip here is they looked at the wrong ferry schedule and they missed the ferry. It's not like your car that's parked outside, the ferry will not wait for you. Um, but once you get the ferry, that's really the first big step. The ferry will come into this pier right here, and it'll dock right there. And to give you some context, the immigration station is over here. A lot of people will like to hike to Mount Livermore, which is the peak of the island. There's also a Civil War site, which I think is somewhere here. Um, Hope I didn't get that wrong. The Camp Reynolds team will get mad at me if I do. But that is where our Civil War site is. And then we also have a World War I, World War II site over here. I would say those are the most common places that people like to visit. All of these do require a hike. And then so getting over here, right, is a 1 mile hike to the immigration station. To our Civil War site is also a 1 mile hike. And then the hike all the way around is going to be 5 miles. And so again, if that hike seems like something daunting or something that you're unable to do, reach out to that email that I showed you. Look for Angel Island Company for their shuttle services. And that's one way that you can see everything without having to do the hike. But if you are interested in the hike, if you're able to do the hike, it is a lovely hike.
Thank you. We have a few more. I know we're getting close to wrapping up. So next one is, how was the name Angel selected for the island?
Yeah, how was the name Angel Island selected? It started from the first Spanish explorer that came to Angel Island. And so people have been here for a long time, right? The Coast Miwok, they'd been here far before Juan de Ayala, that explorer, had arrived. We've unfortunately lost the Coast Miwok name for the island, and so we have nothing else to refer to. And so the first recorded name that we still have that was given to the island was by the Spanish explorer. And the standard at the time, or the standard practice at the time for Spanish explorers, was to name a new place they had discovered. They hadn't discovered it, right? But in their belief, a new place that they had discovered after the most recent day on the Catholic calendar. And the most recent date was the Feast of Our Lady of Angels. And so this was named Isla de los Angeles. And then in turning it into English, we simplified it a little bit to Angel Island.
Great, thank you. And the last one is, can we bring bikes onto the island?
Yes, you can bring bikes to the island. You can definitely do that. People do it all the time. If you're interested in e-bikes or don't have your own bike, that Angel Island company that I mentioned that does shuttle services, they also do bike rentals, again, at intermittent times throughout the year. And so would definitely encourage to bring your own though, because it is a paid service to rent those bikes.
Thank you so much. That does conclude our Q&A. Thank you again for submitting all your wonderful questions, and thank you, Cynthia, for answering them. I have learned so much. And we have a slide up now that's ways to connect with Angel Island State Park that Cynthia has provided. We will also provide this in the email following this event, but feel free to take a picture screenshot, but it goes over if you want to visit Angel Island, how to find information, if you want to book an in-person tour or the K through 5 virtual, if you want to book a virtual tour for middle school class, it breaks those resources down. Even if you want to volunteer at Angel Island. So this is very resourceful, and again, we'll share that again. And then ways to get involved with California State Parks Foundation. Please visit our website at calparks.org, sign up for our email newsletter, volunteer in a state park, donate or become a member, sign one of our petitions, and of course, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. Thank you so much again. This was great. And stay tuned for future Parkside chats. And I just want to give another special thank you again to Cynthia and Angel Island State Park for indulging us on this virtual event. And until next time, have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.